Hello and welcome to this Tuesday's morning market briefing. We've got lots to talk about, but firstly, ECB staff say Christine Lagarde is doing a poor job as the president of the ECB. A union survey finds, as well as that, Israeli hostage relatives storm parliament as Benjamin Netanyahu rejects Gaza truce. We've got lots to talk about on the charts also, but lots happening on the economic calendar. We'll come to that near the end, so make sure you stay around so you can see that. Before we get straight into it, make sure you subscribe. The first article to talk about, of course, is with the ECB. Now, a union survey of staff from the ECB claims Christine Lagarde is performing poorly. This comes as internal dissent in the ECB has seemingly surged in recent years. Now, we haven't actually covered that much about the internal issues maybe within the ECB. Largely, when we do talk about the ECB, we're largely focusing, of course, on the monetary policy, which, President Lagarde forms herself along with her committee. And ultimately, that is what we usually look at. What's the inflation figures? What is the interest rate? What's unemployment rate at? And, this kind of helps us usually as traders or investors within the market to find out where the euro may go or other European assets, or even, how this might affect certain other currencies such as the dollar, which may be paired against the euro. And ultimately, it is so important to, understand those figures as a result. But understanding internal issues within the ECB, let's say, is also something which is of, complete necessity really, and is so important just because of how internal issues may play into the way that monetary policy is formed, and also having these issues within the ECB and, having maybe almost a mutiny of sorts within the ECB itself, where, maybe a new person kind of takes over the role as president, or even, we kind of just see staff walking out or, going on strike and that sort of thing. We could then see that affect the currency which the ECB kind of looks after, and that would be, of course, the euro. So that's also another reason why understanding maybe internal issues within the ECB and why that's so important. Of course, we always hear about issues really to do with the Fed and the dollar, and obviously that's more so just because of how the Fed is so politicized in the USA. But saying that, we have also seen the ECB become increasingly politicized recently, with the Italian Prime Minister, I believe Giorgia Meloni, could be president, but I believe it's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, commenting on the ECB in quite a negative fashion recently, largely as a result of there being issues to do with having high interest rates and the way that's affecting her voters, of course. And she's kind of responded to the ECB's actions in a very kind of negative and aggressive way as a result. And ultimately, this has kind of created certain worries about the way the ECB will continue its leadership within the Eurozone economy and continue to command respect around governing the euro as a whole. And this article really highlights that lack of respect maybe that's forming within ECB staff in relation to Lagarde and her governance in relation to the ECB. So this is so important to definitely keep our eyes on and definitely look to see what may be coming for the future of the ECB, as ultimately Christine Lagarde is halfway through her full term as ECB president. So only halfway, but at the same time that's a significant way through one's career as ECB president. So if we do see that kind of term be cut short maybe, or we even see Lagarde kind of step down or anything like that, we could definitely see a great deal of kind of volatility and downside potential on the euro, which is why this is definitely something that's super important to keep our eyes on. Now, this dissent in relation to the ECB staff represented in the survey is another setback for the ECB president. Slightly more than half of over 1,000 surveyed workers said her performance was very poor or poor. This is extremely bad in comparison to previous presidents such as Mario Draghi, I probably pronounced that wrong, I apologise, with negative ratings just under 9%. So only 9% of staff in those cases reported, his performance as poor or very poor. Or even, Jean-Claude Trichet with 14.5%. So, much lower negative ratings for, her previous predecessors. I can't pronounce anything today, but ultimately, previous ECB presidents have clearly had much lower negative ratings, and to have such high negative ratings for someone like Christine Lagarde, is something that's definitely important to keep our eyes on. Most criticisms of her actions revolved around her activities being too focused on politics, with her this month saying the re-election of Donald Trump as the US president was a threat to Europe. Many surveyed also commented on the fact that Lagarde was not a trained economist, which is unlike the previous two presidents and makes her well less versed in the economic sphere. And this is, something that we're likely going to see if, she continues to kind of act in a more political manner rather than focusing on the economic kind of stats and facts. Now, some frustration, however, could stem from her freezing the budget and hiring process recently. The ECB responded to the survey saying it was flawed and wasn't fair as a representation, with the ECB also saying that in a survey last year, 80% of staff were proud to work at the central bank. So, that's a fair kind of response to make at the same time. Staff, however, a more recent survey showed 60% of staff had no trust in Lagarde and others. Staff, however, are also just angry due to the ECB's policy of increasing staff's pay, but not to meet inflation, and so many are seeing this as an almost pay cut. The survey did, however, highlight that more staff now wanted her to take climate change into account when making ECB monetary policy decisions. So that's something that's also very interesting to note, is that we may be seeing the ECB incorporate kind of, climate change predictions and pricing in issues to do with climate change into its policy in the future. So that's something that's definitely worth keeping your eyes on, and everything related to the ECB is of course very important in relation to the euro. That's all to talk about in this article, though. Next article to talk about, of course, is with Israel and their hostages. Now, Israeli hostage relatives broke into Israel's parliament yesterday, disrupting a committee. This comes in an effort to force Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to bring the hostages home. Now, we've been covering, of course, the issues within Israel since the October the 7th massacre, where we did see Hamas storm the borders of Israel, massacre, thousands, around 1,000 civilians, I believe, and many more soldiers, as well as taking many hostages as well, with that figure being around 250. And ultimately, since then, we've seen an Israeli ground, air and naval operation into the Gaza Strip, with them also making efforts to release hostages held by Hamas. And obviously, we've been covering these kind of deals in relation to hostage releases quite extensively. And ultimately, the deals in relation to the release of hostages have come to not too much avail, really. We did see for a period of time, that temporary truce where we did see Palestinian prisoners as well as Israeli hostages be exchanged. And ultimately, that was quite successful. However, it did kind of come to an abrupt end where we did believe that maybe there was going to be an extension to the ceasefire and a continuation of the kind of truce and exchange of hostages. But ultimately, we did see the kind of battle within Gaza resume, and this has kind of been a serious issue within the internal kind of cabinet of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government, as well as kind of Israeli politics as a whole, as we do see this kind of dividing line being drawn between those that think there should be a continuation of the war and a focus on destroying Hamas as a whole, and the other group which is more so focused on just bringing the hostages home rather than, kind of continuing a war and therefore possibly sacrificing such hostages in the process, as we have already seen, a few hostages die in action basically during the conflict in Gaza so far, but whilst they were being held by Hamas, and this has been as a result of friendly fire incidents and also, it's believed, of course, execution. So this is a very serious matter which Benjamin Netanyahu is having to juggle with and deal with at the moment. And ultimately, we have now just seen, kind of relatives of such Israeli hostages, which are calling for like a ceasefire and release of such hostages, storming into a parliamentary committee session. Now, this follows the relatives of the 130 hostages still held by Hamas, blocking traffic outside of Netanyahu's house in Jerusalem yesterday. Netanyahu is dealing with growing internal pressure to secure the hostages' release, with many now even saying that the hostages are unlikely to be returned alive without a deal with Hamas and other militant groups. Netanyahu has responded, however, saying that the only deal provided by Hamas currently is one in which the hostages are returned and Israel has to withdraw from the Gaza Strip and release Hamas its prisoners, which committed massacres on the October the 7th attacks, which of course would be basically a complete failure of this operation into Gaza, of course, which aims to eradicate Hamas as a whole. Hamas has already released 110 of the 250 hostages taken following a deal which allowed for a temporary ceasefire and the return of Palestinian prisoners. This ceasefire did end, however, and the Israeli offensive into Gaza has since resumed. Nations are now looking to secure a deal in which a permanent ceasefire is the result of any negotiations. Now, this is very, very important to keep your eyes on. Will be affecting world tensions greatly, as the worries of a regional conflict do currently exist, with issues in Yemen and the Houthis as well, adding to kind of these tensions of this kind of ground operation into Gaza, then escalating into a regional conflict. So definitely keep your eyes on all things related to the Middle East and Israel for the moment. That's all to talk about in the articles, though. Next to talk about, of course, is the charts, where we do have quite a bit happening. And to begin with, on US indices, we do have the US 30, which is an interesting position, sitting above that key resistance level which we had highlighted last week. But as we commented on in yesterday's weekly market briefing, we did show how the US 30 had found a great deal of bullish momentum and pushed to the upside, and that's what we did see ending off last week and entering Monday this week. And since then, we haven't actually seen a retest of that liquidity level, which price did break above, and currently price is sitting at all-time high. So we're in a very interesting position where we are having to kind of look at and decide where the US 30 may go from here. An interesting thing to comment on, though, is that the US 30 on the RSI index is currently above that level, which marks an overbought territory, and often we do then see price sell off, and we see price move to the downside before price continues that upswing that we are seeing. So if we were to expect that retracement, we could be looking at that key 3820 Fibonacci retracement level as an area which price may come down to and react with before continuing to the upside, as this is at the very bottom of this liquidity zone, which price has reacted to before as an area of resistance and now may react to as an area of support. So definitely keep your eyes on the US 30. Next to talk about is the dollar, though, if it can load up. But ultimately on the dollar, on the other hand, we are kind of expecting retracement. We have seen that bullish momentum recently after we broke out of that range that price was sitting in for some time, and ultimately we're kind of slowly making our way to the downside now, with there being a really key and interesting level around that 50% Fibonacci retracement tool mark, And so if price does react to that level, then we could see a significant upswing. But obviously fundamentals will definitely play into the way the dollar moves this week. So listen out for any of those key fundamental data points, which could push the dollar to the upside or downside. Next to talk about though is Euro USD. So still on the topic of the dollar, and Euro USD is in a very interesting position because a really interesting bearish kind of spot to sell off from is still, kind of an option that price could interact with and move away from, and that is that 6180 Fibonacci zone, which is sitting in that key liquidity level and marks kind of where price did break out of that counter trend line, which represented that bullish momentum, which is now kind of turned into what's more of a kind of bearish movement. And so if price does make its way up there, we could most definitely see a significant sell-off from that zone and a move to the downside as a result. So definitely keep your eyes on Euro USD. Next to talk about though is pound yen, which has found a great deal of bullish momentum most recently and is currently sitting at all-time highs and is now basically halted and is almost consolidating. So it's a really interesting position to look at on pound yen as we are at these all-time highs and price is failing to break above and is kind of just sitting around this area. On the RSI, we are actually seeing kind of a bearish divergence, a small bearish divergence. So maybe that represents some more sell volume, which could be, which could be seen in the market days ahead. So definitely look out for that. But ultimately, it'll be interesting to see how price continues to react to this liquidity zone, where we do know there's a lot of resistance because it is kind of the top of the market for the past few years. So definitely an important area to note at the moment for pound yen. Next to talk about though is pound dollar. Bitcoin, which has seen a significant sell-off from that area that we did note as a key area of resistance, which price was sitting at yesterday. And from there, we have now continued this movement to the downside, now breaking below that $40,000 a Bitcoin mark, which was kind of seen as like a very important level and a significant level to show that, Bitcoin was back on the upswing, but we have now seen price break back below it. So, could price now make its way down to this key liquidity zone that price interacted with last time at the 38,000 mark? Maybe price still has enough bullish momentum to stay around this area, or in fact, we are going to see that sell volume now come into the market and we will see price reach that level. So that's the next area to really look out for. Obviously, there's liquidity around all this kind of market inequality, but definitely look out for this level in particular where we could find some bullish momentum. Next to talk about though is gold, which is an interesting position because it has now tapped that 6180 Fibonacci mark that we did note out a few days back, and that liquidity zone along with that, and price has sold off from that area and is now seemingly on the downswing. So definitely keep your eyes on gold as we are expecting price to continue to the downside now. Lastly to talk about though on the charts is oil, which yesterday did find a significant amount of bullish momentum and has pushed to the upside, coming into contact with this old kind of liquidity zone, and price is kind of reacting in a bearish manner now to that. So possibly we are going to see a continuation to the upside, but that said, price has been moving around and ranging a lot recently and hasn't shown a clear kind of move into the upside or downside just yet. So whilst we are seeing a bit of bullish momentum, be hesitant and look out for these key liquidity zones as a way to kind of mark out where price could move in the future. That's all to talk about in the chart. So lastly to talk about, of course, is the economic calendar, where we do have quite a bit happening. Now, firstly, we will be getting the Bank of Japan's interest rate decision today, as well as the Japanese balance of trade figure. So some very important Japanese economic data to definitely listen out for and kind of implement maybe into your trading plan. As well as that, we're getting public sector net borrowing figure for the United Kingdom and Britain, of course, as well as that we're getting Canadian housing price index figure along with the Eurozone consumer confidence figure as well. That's a very important one to note. Along with that, we're getting New Zealand's inflation rate figure. I know we don't usually comment on news in relation to the New Zealand, but it's definitely an interesting pair to trade, and so understanding that's very important. But also it relates greatly, of course, to Australia, and so understanding what's going on in New Zealand can often help us paint a picture of what's going on in Australia. And on the topic of Australia, we are finally getting Aussie manufacturing and services figures. So those are all the data points really to listen out for today. Listen out for other news as well, of course, but we've spoken a lot about a lot on the articles, lots on the charts, and lots on the economic calendar. That's all from us at Wildwood Capital. I hope you have a great trading day, but that's all from us once again. See you later. Bye.